Good morning. Happy weekend to you. It is the weekend where I'm at. It is Saturday morning, and I wanted to jump on, do a little live, and say hello and have a little Astro Chat over coffee. I'm having coffee. Maybe you're having coffee or tea or something else that you enjoy. It's nice to see everyone here. So I'm going to begin with lighting some incense. So this blend of incense has rose and jasmine in it, and it smells super divine. So I'm enjoying doing these weekend chats just to check in and say hello, see how everyone's doing. This is a place for me to sort of share some things, some themes that I've noticed, like questions that people have, topics that have come up either in my client sessions in the past week or comments that I've seen on YouTube, and just things that I just want to sort of have like a casual chat about. So here's some incense for you. Good morning, everyone. Hi. It's nice to see you. Happy weekend. Hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing, hope you're safe and healthy and all of those things. So I'm going to put this incense behind me. That'll have to do, I guess. So I will tell you all, I'm very introverted, and a part of me has really loved this quarantine because I've been lucky enough to have my basic survival needs met, and I've been able to like hardcore introvert. It's just been like really great for me, and I realize that's kind of a weird thing to say, and I'm aware that I'm very fortunate because not everyone has that, but I will say I've like noticed how much even the quarantine, like it's become to where it's been so much introverting and so much quarantine that I'm actually starting to miss social engagements, and I've been really missing doing in-person events and in-person classes, and so I'm really excited to do those again when we are allowed to, when it's safe. So that's been something I've been thinking about lately. Okay, so this is just a casual chat. If you all have questions or anything, you can, like, again, this is a space just to casually chat and ask me anything. Angelia, yeah, you've been feeling the same way. Okay, so Angelia, I know you're introverted as well. So if you've also been feeling like, okay, ready to burst out into the world again, yeah, it's been a long time, right? Even for us introverted people, I think sometimes it can be like I feel like I get rejuvenated when I introvert, and then I'm ready to go out into the world for a bit, and then I need to go back inside, and it's kind of like this flow of going back and forth. Hi, Justin. Hi, everyone. Nice to have you here. So I wanted to talk about a theme that I've noticed this week in particular, and I noticed this, I think, in relation to what's happening with Saturn, and it is something that comes up, that's come up a lot in my client work this week, and that comes up not too uncommonly as well. So this is the phenomenon of taking responsibility for other people's feelings, thoughts, or behavior. So like making accommodations for someone, or like being like, you have a partner or a friend or even a boss or something like that, and saying like, like feeling like you need to make sure they're okay or to do something in order to soothe them. Now that in itself is not a bad quality, but if it becomes excessive, and especially when it is to the detriment of your own happiness and your own ability to actually know what it is that you feel and what it is that you want, that can be problematic. And so that's something that I've noticed that's come up a lot this past week. And I think it's important to name that, especially if you're watching this and you're into astrology. I'm assuming that you're somewhat of a sensitive person, into spiritual things. So in the spiritual community, we can see this caregiving quality as like always being very positive. And it is positive. It is a good thing. It's a wonderful, beautiful quality to have. And people that are this way naturally, that is one of your greatest gifts. And that is one of the gifts of people that are helpers and healers, and that like we need that work in the world. We need you very much. And when you take responsibility for other people in ways that either they do not ask you or in ways that crosses a boundary, that it wreaks havoc in your life. And it can be in very extreme ways, it can be in subtle ways, it can be in a way that like sort of builds up over time. And then you're like, oh my gosh, like what am I doing here? And so again, I just want to name that, and name that it is not something that you can just be aware of and then turn off. It is sort of like a tendency that especially people who are highly sensitive tend to have. And so this is commonly called codependent behavior. Now, codependent, the term has a lot of stigma around it. I would love to remove that stigma. I think that codependent behavior is something that a lot of us are trained to do. A lot of us have had to do that in order to survive in childhood, and it's just behavior that's been carried on. People who are in a female or feminine gender role are typically trained to have this kind of behavior, to like go in and to like make sure that everyone is okay, and to take responsibility for other people's feelings. So all of that to say that, you know, that is a thing that happens. And I think that it's coming up around this time where Saturn is changing signs, because that is not a sustainable way to live. When you do that, when you put all of your focus on someone else being happy and like taking responsibility for their feelings and their actions and just like them as a human being, then you are not taking responsibility for yourself. And this is Saturn, right? You're not taking responsibility for your happiness and what it is that you need and what it is that works for you. And like even just being aware, again, like sometimes I've noticed a lot with some clients that I have will be like talking about especially relationship stuff, and they'll be telling me, you know, this person that's in their life, whether that is a romantic partner or a family member, they're like, well, they want this, and I'm trying to, you know, like figure out what they want. And my response is, what do you want? And it's often that they don't really know. And this, again, this is not bad. This is not to shame, but I think this is something that we don't talk about often. And so people don't realize that this is something that's very normal and that it is something that is important to work through. So, so there's a lot of ways to work around this. I think just being aware of it, that it is a thing that happens, like that is the first step, and that's a big deal. And over time, the more, just like anything else, it's like a muscle that you exercise, the more that you become aware of it, the more that you can turn in and say, okay, like I can allow this other person to have their feelings, have their experience, do a behavior that maybe is detrimental to them. I don't need to go in and save them. I have like enough, I got enough to worry about. One of my like very dear mentors and sweet friends, Carrie Samuel, she would say, you know, those other people, like everyone else, they have their own spirit guides to help them. Like they don't need you to swoop in and take care of them. They have their own team totally dedicated to them. Now, that doesn't mean that we should not pursue being compassionate and being helpful, especially if you are a person who wants to do or is doing healing and helping work. I think that, again, like that is so important. But there's a difference between doing that when it is like unsolicited, or versus where it's like an actual, something that is a service that you do, where there is reciprocalness through money or trade or something like that. So I want to see, I saw a lot of comments in here, so I want to say that. Hi, good morning, good morning. It's so good to see you all. Purple Heart says, story of my life. Corinne says shaman. Yeah, that's a common term that people use for this kind of thing. Angelia says, so happy and proud I've healed a lot of my codependency tendencies and looking forward to be 100% free of it. Yeah, so I think it's something that the more that you pay attention to it, it's like so subtle the way that it can kind of manifest. And I think a really great example of something that's like super subtle is not wanting to say no to someone because you're afraid that you're going to hurt their feelings. So this could be like not wanting to say, I don't feel like having a Zoom chat today, or, I don't feel like doing the dishes right this moment. I'm going to do them tonight or tomorrow or whatever. If you do that if you like say yes because you don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, that is a part, like it's again very subtle, but this mindset, this way of being, like really like this is an energy that is working through you, that is a foundation for the way that you live your life. And so I'm not saying that to like freak you out or anything, but it is like, it's important to pay attention to these things, because the way that we do small things, the way that we think about things, like our logic, our belief system, like we've been talking about Sagittarius with the South Node being in Sagittarius, that is the belief system, that informs everything. And it's like a very intricate web to untangle. Tin Gypsy says, oh my gosh, great reminders of remembering that others have their own team. Yeah, isn't that like, like for me, that's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I can relax because these other people, like, people are not just waiting for you to come and help them. They have their own spiritual guidance team. They have their own higher self, and we don't always know what someone needs. We don't know what someone's journey is. Intelligent Bodywork says, so great that you bring up this. First put your own oxygen mask on and then help. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really important too, is that ultimately you are able to help more when you're coming from a place of internal clarity and internal resourcefulness. So it's like not just about putting on your own mask and filling up your own cup, so to speak. I think it's also like the more that you redirect to yourself first, then your whole entire being is more clear. And I'm talking like more subtle, energetic, like when you go to yourself first and then you interact with others, you're coming to them with more of a sense of yourself. And people can feel you more when you do that. It's really powerful. Corinne says, their team, I've never been able to say no because I must take care. Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, it's very natural to feel that way. It's very natural to feel like this compulsion to do something. And a part of that comes from our own like discomfort with being around other people who are in pain, which is like a totally normal human response. It's very normal, especially again for people who are highly sensitive, sensitive to their environment, sensitive to others. I think that is also part of why it's really helpful to build up a stronger sense of self, like just knowing who you are, knowing what you like, what you don't like, even like building up a strong connection with the physical body through body work in whatever way that that works for you. Like this is all, like all of this is very Saturn stuff, right? Like building up a strong foundation, a sense of self, like connecting with the body. It's all about like tangible physical things. So that's what I wanted to say about that. So I also I have a quote that I wanted to read to you all. But I also wanted to talk about the finding the lunar cycles in your birth chart. So this is something that I've gotten questions from during my recent moon, the new moon circle for the new moon in Sagittarius. And then I made a video recently about how to manifest with the moon, sort of like a follow-up video to one that I did a while ago. And I've gotten a lot of questions like, how do you find where the moon is falling within your birth chart? So I can't answer that now because it would require some visuals. So I'm going to make a video tutorial, like a tutorial class on how to do that. But I did want to just mention that if that is something that you're interested in, the 2021 Moon Journal that I've published is an excellent resource for you because it has a lot of the astro basics in it, like the glyphs and the signs and the houses and what they all mean. So like this is an excellent thing for you to have. If you haven't already gotten your Moon Journal, you can get that on my website, shaunamcgrath.astrology.com. I'll put a link to this recording. Danelle says, what if you don't know the exact time you were born? That is an excellent question. So if you don't know what time you were born, this is a two-part answer to that question. Number one, I would ask you, have you looked for your birth certificate? Like, do you have a birth certificate? Have you asked family? Because sometimes people don't realize it's on there. It does happen though where maybe your birth certificate doesn't say the time or family doesn't remember. In that case, I would use your moon sign as your rising. I've found that to like resonate a lot with people. And even in Indian astrology, they actually use that as an additional chart. They'll use your birth chart based on your time, and then they will also incorporate a chart using your moon as the rising. So like they actually blend, or not blend, they use both of those in addition to a lot of other things. But that's my answer. If you have absolutely no way of knowing what time you were born, I would use the moon as your rising sign, and that you can find out just based on your birthday. It does happen maybe that your moon changed signs during the day, so I would keep that in mind. I would cast the chart for noon on your birthday, and then see, does the moon change signs in the morning or the evening? Maybe you were born in the morning versus the evening. I realize this might be kind of a complicated answer. If you have questions about this, feel free to email me and I'm happy to assist. Like this is something that I can just check really quickly. Danielle says, okay, thanks. I had no idea it was on my birth certificate. Yes, please find your birth certificate. If you don't have a copy of it in your files, you can request a copy of your birth certificate from the state that you were born in. So you can even just Google, I think it's called like the Vital Records Department or something like that. And I think right now with COVID, you can just request it online. It does take a couple of weeks for them to mail it to you, but it is well worth the request if you can get your time of birth, because that does make things more accurate. That being said, I think if someone doesn't have their birth time, like I have a couple of clients who it just wasn't on their birth certificate, they don't know what time it is. I feel like there's a reason that we don't have it, if that makes sense. You know, the universe, the world works in mysterious ways, and there's a reason. Public records. So if you just Google how to get my birth certificate from California or Arizona or whatever state you live in, you'll find a link to the county records, county public records, and you can request that. So, I think it's so important for us to know this, and this is something that some of you have heard me harp on before, but it's important to know a little bit about your chart, because in Western astrology, we have this tendency to think about things in parts. Like you enter your birthday and then you get like a list. Like if you go to Cafe Astrology, you get a list of planetary placements. And this is very it's very compartmentalized. And I think that's a product of our westernized mentality, that it's like, okay, I have this here and then I have this here, and we don't think, like I have my physical body and my health, and then I have my mental health. You know, like even our medical system is very compartmentalized. You go to a specialist for different things and none of them communicate. So it's very different in other parts of the world, like especially the Eastern world, where medicine is about the whole situation and you look at everything as interrelated. And this is also so with the birth chart. So I want you to have a copy of your birth chart, like the circle, the mandala, because everything is all connected, and you don't have to know what all of it means in order to gain a benefit from that, but just you being able to see this and to know that there is a cohesiveness. There is one thing is connected to the other in all of these different ways that makes you so unique and beautiful and wonderful. That I feel like is really important. Let's see. Okay, so I also want to talk about energy work, your energy clearing, cleansing, energy replenishment, because that is also something that came up this week as well. You're welcome, Natal. Intelligent Bodywork says, so lovely to stumble into your live stream. Thanks. I hope you have the perfect amount of social interactions in the next coming days. Very nice for the reminder. Happy holidays to you too. It's so sweet. Okay. So again, this time is for you all. So if you have other questions that you want to ask me, no question is too silly or insignificant, because if you have a question, usually someone else has the same question or something similar, or they can benefit from it. So, so working with energy came up this week. We talked about this a bit in our new moon class. If you were there, you remember. So it's so important to work with your energy on a daily basis. And I realize that might be too much for people, but I would encourage you to keep an open mind and know that it doesn't have to be time consuming like you think. So in this moon class, we had some people say that they've noticed, especially around the eclipse time, a lot of negative interactions sort of being directed to them. Like when they didn't do anything to provoke someone, there was kind of this lash of aggressive or angry type of energy. And, sometimes that happens. But when it happens, consistently, and you're whoa, what is happening? Am I wearing a sign or something on my back? That is usually a sign of your energy field needing to be cleared in some way. And this is just, it's like psychic hygiene, really, is what I think about. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. working with salt or salt water is one of the easiest ways. You can put a teaspoon of salt in a cup of water or a spray bottle and just sprinkle it around yourself. You can take a salt bath, which I absolutely love. I know not everyone has a bathtub. So just sprinkling the salt around you, doing that like in the morning after you get out of the shower, as you're getting ready. What else did I want to say? Oh yeah, taking like a handful of salt and just scrubbing it on your body in the shower, scrubbing it like on your whole body, especially the bottoms of your feet. That can be super cleansing as well. And any meditation that involves reconnecting with your body, with light, any meditation in general, especially that is grounding. But I wanted to mention that like, even if you just do the salt thing like every day, that's going to help you a lot. Now, there are a lot of other more intensive energy cleansing treatments. Maybe I'll make a video or do a class about that at some point. But I just wanted to mention that if you're noticing that you're getting a certain kind of attention that you don't like, or clumsiness is also a symptom. Again, not always, but like if you're like, there's lots of things breaking or you're dropping or there's mishaps or accidents, that's also a sign that maybe it's time to clear your energy. And I think this is important, especially if you are a highly sensitive person, because you're walking through the world and you're taking in everything. And you can handle it to a certain extent, but it's kind of like, would you ever go without taking a shower, Like, no, that would be silly. So I think same for working with your energy. And the more that you have like this time and space to contemplate and connect with yourself, kind of again, like we were talking about going to yourself first, that actually re-energizes. And so that's why also I decided to start doing more classes where we do meditation and some energy work. So I'm doing one for the solstice on Monday, this Monday, the 21st at 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that will be like meditation, energy clearing, Reiki and Diksha to clear, cleanse, but also like bring in some blessings, bring in some protection, and just like a rejuvenation, like a reset of energy. And especially working with the solstice and with Jupiter and Saturn coming together on that day. So I'm really excited about that. And I'll be doing more classes like that where it's just a simple meditation and an energy clearing working with the transits. If you want to sign up for that, you can. I'll have more information on my Instagram, but you can also just Venmo or PayPal me. It is $10 to $15 sliding scale. Give what you can. And it's all via Zoom. Let's see. Angelia says, what is the significance of the degrees in the natal chart? Okay, that's a good question. Do you have a specific placement or just in general? But I'll answer both, sort of. So, what is the significance of the degrees in the natal chart? So the degrees are sort of like a measuring system. Each sign has 30 degrees. So it goes from 0 to 29. So Aries goes from 0 to 29. And then the next one, there's Taurus, from 0 to 29 of Taurus. And then the next one, it's Gemini, from 0 to 29. So you have this big swath of Aries, and the degrees are sort of like marking where within the Aries sphere it is. Now from that, we can decipher where the planets are. So like, is a planet at 0 degrees of Aries, or is it at 29 degrees of Aries? And this is important because it tells us how close other planets are to each other in like a geometric relationship. So if I have Venus here at 0 degrees of Aries, and then I have, let's say Jupiter here at 29 degrees of Aries, like they're pretty far apart, They're still in Aries. So this is still a whole sign conjunction. So this is still very important that Venus and Jupiter are together in the sign of Aries. So I would still look at that and be like, oh yeah, like this is important. Venus and Jupiter are, they're like talking to each other. They're in the same space together. They're working together. They have the same ruler. They're both ruled by Mars. But as far as the degree, they're so far away that it's like, well, they're not, you know, maybe like they're across the room from each other. The closer they are in degree to one another, the more in this case, the more fused they are, the more close the communication is. Now, if we're talking about an opposition, this also has the same effect. So like if Venus is here at, let's say, 15 degrees of Aries, and then Saturn is over here at 15 degrees of Libra, that tells me as an astrologer that this person has Venus, Saturn like really strongly connected in their chart. Versus if Venus were at 0 degrees, Saturn were at 29, it's still a Venus-Saturn opposition, but it doesn't have as much bite, doesn't have as much oomph. It's not as present in your life. So the degrees, they're like a measuring system, and they also help me to prioritize what planet energy is the loudest when it comes to aspects. So you're really using degrees when it comes to aspects, or when you're figuring out what the rising sign degree is. I hope that answers your question and makes sense. When you are, let's see, what else do I want to say? There's something else I want to say about that. So when we're talking about working with the new moon or the full moon, you look at the degree of the moon. So let's say this new moon that we just had in Sagittarius, new moon solar eclipse, it was at 20 degrees of Sagittarius. And so that is important because you're like, okay, here is Sag. It's like here. Are there any other planets that are close? Like, do you have your sun at 0 degrees Sag? For me, I think a new moon or eclipse, I want to see it within like 2 to 3 degrees in order for me to say like, oh, that's going to have a very personal effect on this person's planet. So like if you had Venus at 20 degrees of Sag, and then the new moon was happening at 23 degrees, I would be like, oh, like this person's Venus is being touched, it's being activated, it's being emphasized by this new moon. Versus if you had Venus at like even 15 degrees in your birth chart, and then the new moon at 23 degrees of Sag, I'd be like, it's in there, but it's like I wouldn't pay a lot of attention to Venus. We would look more at the house placement. And this is true for transits as well. So transits is like a whole, like that's too complicated for me to share in this video. But it is, the degrees are sort of like a prioritizing technique. Now, you don't even need degrees, really. Like, especially if you're just starting out, it's not essential. And in fact, when horoscopic astrology was first invented in the Hellenistic era, when astrologers first had the idea to create a chart based on someone's birth, because astrology didn't start this way. I don't know if you know this, maybe you do, be like, Shauna, I know it. But astrology initially started in sort of as like an omen watching technique. So it was originally the Babylonians, they would like look at when Venus was rising, or when Venus was like in a particular geometrical arrangement to Saturn or any other placement. It was more like they were watching the sky. And then if something happened, like a bird passed or there was a storm or something, they would interpret it. And then they wrote down, or maybe they didn't write down, they recorded how everything worked. Like, oh, when Venus does this, then this happened in the mundane world. And so we're making this connection. Later, like much later, there was this idea to create a chart of the sky at the time that someone was born. And so initially, the time measurement system was not as sophisticated as we have now. So they originally didn't even have degrees. Like, it was all just based on the sign. So I share that with you just so that you know that, like, more is not always better. I'm a big fan of keeping things simple. Sometimes the more that you do with the basic things, like that brings more dimension and it brings more clarity. I think one of the things that I've noticed a lot, or the feedback that I've gotten, is people who are trying to learn how to read their birth chart, they get overwhelmed by all of the information. Like, that is the number one most common thing that I hear from people when they're trying to read a chart. Even if they've looked at their chart and they understand it and they can tell you all of their placements, it's like bringing things into cohesion and like prioritizing. That is very difficult. And again, that's where the degrees do come in, because it does help you prioritize. But in the beginning, sometimes it's like information overload. So I hope that helps. Okay, so I think I'll take one more question and then I'll hop off. And, I'll just say too, if you want to learn how to work with your chart more, and you have questions like this, like what do the degrees mean? What do the houses mean? How do I follow my transits? Like, I think I kind of know what's going on, but it's difficult to wrap my arms around. That is something that we could totally do an Astro session around. So that's something that we do anything you want really in an astrology session, any focus you want, but that is something that we could totally do, just so that if that is something that you want. Now, Ethel says, can you talk about intuition versus trauma? Please and thank you. Intuition versus trauma. Tell me a little bit more about that. I'm curious what you mean. Naomi says, same about the prioritizing the chart. It's very overwhelming for me. Yeah, so like, please know that's very normal. It's very normal, and I promise you, one day, if you like continue to work with it and to study and to learn, one day it will just like, you'll get it and it will click and it'll be okay. I will be doing sometime in the spring an Astro 101 online course. So that'll be specifically geared towards really understanding all of the different layers and then learning how to prioritize. So that's a long ways off, but I want you to know that, at least for right now, the more that you work with the basics, like understanding the planets and what their significance is, and the houses and what their significance is, like, you can do a lot with that. Yeah, I'm excited too about the course. It's, it's one of those things where I have an idea and I'm like, oh yeah, like this would be really cool. And then the more that I go into it, I'm like, oh my gosh, like there's so much that I have to say about this. And it sort of like takes on a life of its own. So hence why in spring. Okay, so another thing that I'll be doing too is in this vein of working with your chart and following the lunar cycles, I find that working with the lunar cycles is one of the easiest and most accessible ways to start learning how to work with astrology, how to work with your chart. And so I'll be doing at some point in the new year a monthly circle or a monthly gathering for people who want to work with 2021 Moon Journal and, like answering questions that you have, working with your personal birth chart and incorporating that into what is listed in the Moon Journal. So I'm really excited for that. And that is something that I think that, like, the more that you're just like touching the astrology on a regular basis, that's going to help you. And that is going to inform your inner world and your outer world as well. So I'm really excited about that. And the Moon Journal, you can get that on Amazon, all the different Amazon marketplaces. It's international, or you can download it from my website as a PDF. Let's see. Oh, okay. Ethel says, sometimes I feel something in situations, but then I doubt myself, thinking it might be my past experiences. Okay, I see. It might be my past experiences kicking in. Then I don't know if I should listen to my intuition or try to calm my hyperactive mind. Okay, this is such a good question. And very, this is like a common conundrum. Okay. So, this is what I will say about that. So Ethel's question is essentially, how do you know if when you have like a response? And I'm thinking it's like when you're like, you have a funny feeling about something, or you're hesitating, or like something, you're like, oh, like, I don't know, I feel weird about this. Is that feeling your intuition, like a wise part of you that is giving you good, authentic information? Or is that something from your past that was a trauma or a really bad experience? And are you taking the past into the future, if I understand it correctly? So I think this is complicated because there is a lot of, I'll call it propaganda in the spiritual community about releasing your trauma and releasing your baggage and not taking the past into the future with you, and releasing, cutting cords with people and all of this. And though that is, like, it is good to do that. It is good to not take past experiences. Like if you had a partner cheat on you or do something really horrible, it's like, yeah, you don't want to bring that belief, like, oh, that's what people do, into a new relationship and then assume that everyone is that way. That's like harmful, right, to the relationship. So you don't want to do that. And I think that this idea that we need to be like hyper vigilant about releasing and clearing and like not bringing our own stuff into the present, I think that is like a misinformed, I feel like that's sort of like harmful in some ways, because it makes us like paranoid about doing that. And your past experiences, they do inform you. You learn, you are who you are because of your past experiences. And your intuition sort of like works based off of those. Now, I think the way to work with this is really one situation at a time, because there is a difference. There's a difference in the feeling tone and a difference in the situation, where if it's something that happened to you in the past. And Ethel, if you want to share a specific example, feel free to do that, and and I can talk about it more specifically. Or if anyone has a specific example, like something that you're working with right now that's really challenging. So when you have something from your past that is coming back, it has like a very like sharp, hot, like panicky kind of feeling to it. The feeling tone is, oh no, I don't want this to happen again. And some people might call that when you're triggered. In psychology, they would call it maybe like a complex being constellated. And again, it has this like very panicky, very urgent kind of feeling. And it's very like heady. It's very heady. It's like thoughts. It might be more visceral if the past experience was like physically traumatizing, but it feels very like, to me, it feels like very spinny. It feels very like anxious prone. So that is when you're bringing something like a situation in the past into the current situation. Now, intuition is super subtle. It's not going to hit you over the head. There are some exceptions to that. When you are in danger and you have an intuition about being in danger, that is more like strong usually. But it's not, again, it's not panicky. It's more like, whoa, like something is wrong. Like if you're in a location where maybe your life is in danger, or there is someone whose energy would be harmful to you, usually that is a strong feeling of like something is not right here. But again, it's not really heady, it's not really panicky. It's more like something is wrong, but I don't know what it is. And oftentimes it is super, super subtle. It's almost like you're like, am I like, like what's happening there? It's not very clear cut. So I realize this is a little bit ethereal, but it is an ethereal thing to explain. And I find that the way to understand, like, okay, what is actually happening is your response. Where is this coming from? And I want you to take yourself seriously. Take your intuition seriously. Everything that you're feeling, it is for a reason. And so you can start to track, like, what is happening. Now, sometimes it happens where these are blended, where maybe you have an intuitive hit on something, and it reminds you of something that happened in the past. And so that's complicated, right? So, like, what do you do with that? In that situation, you can start with, okay, like, what am I feeling? What's my gut? What does it remind me of? Situation in the past. Okay. And then you're just going to set that there for a moment. And then you're going to look at what is actually happening around you. Like, what is literally happening? If you get a bad feeling about someone, what are they doing? What has their history been? Do you have a history with them? What are their actions? What are their behavior? But I think, like, ultimately it comes down to, like, what is your feeling about this? And your feelings, there is a wisdom there. And I think that we forget that. And I think that we're like so, again, there's like this, I would call it propaganda in the spiritual community about like, clearing your baggage and cutting cords and everything. And I think to a certain extent, it is impossible to forget and to, like, that's like disassociation to a certain extent, to say like I'm free of my past, because it is always with you. It is always informing you. That does not mean that it is always harming you. It is always informing you, and you get to decide, okay, like, is this something that is a trigger that is like, in psychology it would be called, like Jungian psychology, it would be called a complex. Or is this something that is like more wise that I would benefit from paying attention to? Now, I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's helpful. I actually wrote recently one of my final papers on on Jungian psychology, where I explore, among other things, this idea of complexes. So maybe I was thinking it might be fun to read that and to do a dialogue and answer questions that you have, because I know some of you have expressed interest in Jungian psychology, the work of Marion Woodman, and like what that type of psychology is doing is really working with this topic that we're talking about, working with your unconscious unconscious beliefs and unconscious patterns, which is the past coming forward, and then working with your intuition, working with spirit, working with the divine. Like that's really, it's about like, you know, figuring out the difference between these two things. Jung was a big advocate of doing that via dreams and being symbols. So I hope that makes sense. I saw you all had some comments. Forget Me Not says that was a great explanation. Good, I'm glad. I know what you mean with the situation, sudden panic-ish feeling versus the subtle. Yeah, okay, so like that is key. I do want to note though, like sometimes when you're in danger, like that is more strong. But again, it's not panicky. The panicky feeling is like, I need to do something to like, and it's usually like where you react and then you're like, ah, fuck, I shouldn't have done that. Like that's more, like those are the things to like, you know, hold in yourself a little bit more. And, you know, we're all human. Like you're going to be doing this, you know, living this life for the rest of your life. And the more that you work with these two sort of like poles, I promise, like the more you get mastery over it. So it's not like you need to just like do it and get over it, you know, take a class, take a workshop, do a cord cutting and you're good. No, it's like this process of refinement. Okay. My Leo Moonside says, hey, I'm a counselor, so what I do is journal and try to put it into words. I process with safe people. Yes, fantastic. And just starting to learn to trust my intuition. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. Yeah, totally. That's why I need to get Shauna's journal because I think to work with the moon more to figure out what's on and what's off intuition-wise, but just my 2 cents. Yeah, so this is the thing too, the moon journal, the 2021 moon journal, it's not just like what sign is the moon in. It also talks about the transits and what's happening. And what's really cool is the transits, they reflect the energy, like the tone and what's happening. And you can sort of like decipher, okay, like what is actually happening here? What is actually going on? And that's like really working with symbols. And that's something that I wrote about in one of my papers as well, which I would love to share with you at some point. Okay, cool. Angelia says, I would love that. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, okay, good. So I'm thinking maybe after the new year, I'll sit down and read those to you, because it's the way I've written it, it's like very outlining, very basic, and it also just gives you some additional resources as well. Okay, fantastic. So I will end with a quote that I actually posted today, but I was like, oh, this is so good. And I feel like it's relevant to what we've been talking about. If you want to, so one of the biggest things to strengthen your intuition and to, you know, work out the difference between these issues is to do any type of divination or meditative work. That is going to strengthen your intuition. So I know meditation isn't for everyone. There's lots of different ways, you know, from like Tai Chi or meditative movement, swimming, running can be meditative. Anything that gets you into an altered state of consciousness is helpful. So that being said, if you want to join me for the solstice circle on Monday, I would love to have you. It is sliding scale, $10 to $15, give what you can. It is this Monday the 21st on the solstice, on the Grand Conjunction at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And so we'll do a guided meditation. I'll do some energy work of Reiki and Diksha, and we'll do a divination there as well. So I'm really excited, and I would love to have you join me. You can find out more information on the link that I'll put below. The psychology style that I mentioned is Jung, Carl Jung, Jung. Let's see if I can type it. Carl Jung. So he followed Freud, and he essentially elaborated on Freud's idea of the unconscious. Because before Freud, no one knew that that was a thing. I think we forget that. Okay, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I think people forget that before, pre-1900s, or 1901, people didn't know that you could have an unconscious thing. And so I love Jung's work because he elaborated on it and brought up the idea, among many other things, of the collective unconscious. So this book that I'm reading from, The Descent of the Goddess, A Way of Initiation for Women by Sylvia Brinton Pereira. She's a Jungian analyst, a Jungian psychologist, essentially. This is a fantastic book. I highly recommend it, especially if you are going through what feels like a dark night of the soul. The process of initiation in the esoteric and mystical traditions in the West involves exploring different modes of consciousness and rediscovering the experience of unity with nature and the cosmos that is inevitably lost through goal-directed development. So I feel like this speaks to a lot of what we've talked about today, especially intuition versus being triggered, because our whole westernized consciousness is on this goal-directed development. What are you accomplishing? What are you doing? What's your worth? Especially for people who identify as women, it's what do you how do you look? What is your value? And so by having that focus, we lose these different modes of consciousness. We lose this experience of unity with nature and the cosmos. And I think a lot of us are reclaiming that. But it does require, I wanted to share that with you today because as we have Jupiter and Saturn moving into a different sign, joining in the sky, there is this change in the way that you live your life that is required in order to have this connection with nature, with the cosmos. We have to soften a bit. It requires a different way of doing things. So I'll leave you with that. I hope to see you Monday for the Solstice Circle. I'm wishing you a wonderful weekend, sending lots of love, and I will talk to you soon.